I think they did with Debbie is yeah.
All right, everyone. Good evening. We're at 8:40. We are ready to get started. New Masechta, Baruch Hashem, Maseches Eruvin. Please do not be afraid by its title. Maseches Eruvin is not as bad as other Masechtos that I fear, and certainly in the beginning it'll be familiar terms. In Maseches Shabbos, we spent a fair chunk of time speaking about a mavui. And a mavui is probably the best way to think of it, as someone texted me after last night's shir. Someone texted me as a mavui, basically one of our alleyways that's closed off at the back of an alleyway where the backyards dump into the middle area. That's approximately correct. I don't know if a halachic analysis would determine the same, but a mavui is approximately that. And what we're going to be learning in Maseches Eruvin is a lot about the laws and principles of how to make an eruv. As some background, a city like ours, where we have a number of Eruvin, one which connects to the other. It's not all one. Some of them were built by different people. Nevertheless, the halacha is that we are not allowed to build an Eruv in an area where carrying would be an Isser Doraisa. The only time an Eruv can be built is in a place where it is otherwise only an Isser Derabanan to carry. So we need to keep that in mind as we learn. And Chazal put into place a number of rules and guidelines to make sure that we would be able to carry in a way that's mutter, where we would not have any mistakes of violating this Isser. And one of them was ensuring that when we're in this rabbinic space, that we have a reminder, a heker, according to some. We'll see maybe the language of Pesach is a little bit more accurate. We have these things that are our reminders, a lechi or a koreh, a beam. We have some on the outside of this wall over here, on this wall, on the outside wall of Makor, just a little plastic thing, if you've noticed it, and right above it is a wire that connects to the light pole. And we use that to try to cordon off the parking lot for whatever reason. It has since fallen down. So if you do rely on the Eruv, don't go in the parking lot on Shabbos. But these things are all reminders, and that's really our starting off point here with the first Mishnah, with Eruvin, Daf Beis. Let's get started. Mavui, if you have a mavui, she gavoa lamala me'esrim ama, if the space between the ground and the top, let's say that there's a wire at the top, if it is greater than 20 amos, yima 8. The Tanna Kama writes you must reduce that height. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Tzarech, he was of the opinion that you do not. Seemingly, Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that even if it's 25 amos, even if it's 30 amos high, we don't care. We'll have to get into the lumdus of each of these shitas to understand why that's the case. That's about the height. V'harachav me'eser amos yama'it. The Tanna Kama is of the opinion that if there is a hole that is wider than 10 amos, it must be reduced. An omission here, we don't see Rabbi Yehuda arguing. We have to see if that's going to be the case in a little bit. But if in regards to a lateral, a width hole in the wall, if there is a tzuras HaPesach, then afal pishahu rachav me'eser amos, even if it's much wider, ein tzarech l'mayit, even the Tanna Kama would be of the opinion that you don't need to. A tzuras HaPesach can be defined as having two posts that are standing up with one lying across the top of both of those posts. Kind of like the way that our doorways are built. But if you have that it's built that you have two posts and then across the top of them there is something resting on top, that is your classical tzuras HaPesach, and that, in this particular instance, would be fine as a breach in the wall. We would not consider it problematic. And even the Tanna Kama, who multiple times in our Mishnah required that we should reduce the distance or the gap between one piece of the wall and the next, or from the ground to the height, in those cases, he said you should be mamayit, but here if there's a tzuras HaPesach, ein tzarech lamayit. And let's look at a comparative Mishnah that sounds almost the same from a slightly different area of halacha. And with this we open the Gemara. Tanan Hasam, the Mishnah writes in Maseches Sukkah she gavoa lamala me'esrim ama psula. If you have a sukkah and the cavity between the ground and the schach is greater than 20 amos, 20 amos itself is fine. 20 plus 20.1 is problematic. The halacha is psula. So if you're linguistic, you'll instantly realize that psula is not the same language that our Mishnah used by mavui. There we use the language of yama'it, and we're going to analyze that momentarily. What does the Tanna Kama hold? It's pasul. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir, Rabbi Yehuda seems to be of the opinion that sukkah is kosher. Party lines. The Tanna Kama seems to hold what he holds. 20 is a maximum, both by mavui and by sukkah. And Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion, party line as well, that you have to be mamayit, you have to lower those two. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that even greater than that amount would be permissible. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Maishna gabe sukkah detani psula. Why is it that when we said that the cavity, the height of the inside of the sukkah was greater than 20, you said that it was puzzle. But the gabe mavui tani takanta. But when it came to a mavui, you said just go fix it. You might lower it. Why is it that we were sharper with the world of sukkah than we are with the world of mavui? So the Gemara presents two answers. One is I can't really call it balabatish, but it does strike you as that when you read it. The first answer is that sukkah is doraisa. Therefore, tani psula. By a din doraisa, you have a mitzvah doraisa to eat in a sukkah. And because there's a din doraisa, we use sharper language to make sure that you know that you're not allowed to eat in that sukkah, or to say better, you're not yotze the mitzvah in that sukkah. And if you make a bracha of a leishev in that sukkah, the bracha levatala, all the ripple effects of being in a non-kosher sukkah, whatever that may be. So therefore, tani psula, a stronger language. Mavui derabanan, but as mentioned already, we only build an eruv in an area that's derabanan. So because a mavui is derabanan, therefore we had a more light language of tani takanta. You can just fix it, namely yima'et, which was the language of our Mishnah. That's the first answer. V'i ba'isema. No, there's another possibility. V'i ba'isema deoraisa nami tani takanta. Really, in regards to sukkah, we also could have said yima'et, because what do you think the Tanakama holds? If the sukkah is 21 amos, you have to raise it to the ground and start all over again? No, you reduce it. It's not about, the language is indicating something. So he allows you to do that. So says the Gemara, really, the fact that sukkah is doraisa, we still could have written yima'et. Why then did we use the language of psula? Ela sukkah denefishin mile pasik v'tani psula, because there are so many halachos in regards to sukkah. You've got lavud, you've got the defanos, you've got the schach, you've got the shape. What are the walls made out of? What is the schach made out of? Kabbalas tuma. Go through the whole list. Chazan ish sukkah. Is it mamid, demamid? All the different shilas that come up in sukkah. It's nefishe mile. There's so many halachos. Therefore, pasik v'tani psula. We wanted to remind you: don't paskin on your own. Go ask a shaila. Go learn Maseches sukkah and learn it with a Mishnah Brura. But mavui delo nefishe mile. It's kind of funny because there are a lot of laws about sukkah. What does this actually mean? There are a lot of laws, but maybe as it relates to lechi v'korah, it's not complicated. Less than 20, lechi or korah, you can carry. Pretty simple, straightforward. And therefore, says the Gemara, by mavui delo nefishe mile tani takanta. And that closes off the first mini part of our Gemara, the comparative analysis between a Mishnah about mavui and a Mishnah about sukkah. 1/3 of the way down, Daf Beis Amud Aleph Maseches Eruvin. Let's continue. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rab. This is Shita number 1. We will see that there's another option on the Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rab says, Chachamim lo lamduha elami pischo shel heichal. The Chachamim, the Tanakama, learned their shita from the opening of the heichal. The heichal on the Beis Hamikdash was 20 amos tall. So therefore, they said that's a Pesach, that's pshat in Pesach, and therefore, if it's more than that, it's not a Pesach. You have to lower the mavui. However, Rabbi Yehuda lo lamda elami pischo shel ulam. This is the chamber that was just prior to the heichal. So if you remember the pictures that you've seen about the Beis Hamikdash, there's a very, very tall edifice with the doors. You go in that room, and then from there, there's a gateway into the Kodesh. So the larger one had an opening of 40 amos, very tall. And the inner one, the outer one's called the Ulam, the inner one's called the Heichal, and that had an opening of Pesach of only 20. So that's Rabbi Yehuda. Ditznan, the Mishnah writes, Pischo shel Heichal gofho esrim amma. The doors to the inner chamber, to the Kodesh, was 20 amos tall. The Rachbo Eser Amos, it's also 10 wide, also reminiscent of our Mishnah, which the Tanakama said, if it's more than 10, you have to be Mamayit. Let's continue. It says the Gemara, V'shel Ulam Govho Arba'im Amma. The height of that is 40 amos. The Rachbo Eser Amos, and its width is 20 amos. Fine. So that's the Mishnah that indicates where the Chachamim and where the Tanakama got their shitas from, either from the Heichal or from the Ulam, and their respective shitas reflect how they feel about a mavui that's exactly 20 amos tall. Some say yes, some say no. Tanakama is going to be more machmir. Yehuda is going to be more lenient. And not only do we learn them from the same building and different parts of the building, granted, but the same building, but the Shneihen, both the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, Mikra Echa Darshu, they learned it from one pasuk. It says the pasuk Ushchato Pesach Ohel Moed. The Rabbanon Savre, the rabbis, the Tanakama, they were of the opinion Kedushas Heichal L'chud, Kedushas Ulam L'chud, that they had different levels of sanctity, obviously, because as you get closer to the Kodesh HaKodashim, you have a greater level of sanctity. And then the Chiksiv Pesach Ohel Moed, the question is, what's pshat with the word Pesach? How do we define a Pesach? Is it by the Ulam or by the Heichal? So the Tanakama says, Pesach Ohel Moed HaHeichal Ksiv. So because he says that the word Pesach is on the Heichal and the height of the opening of the Heichal was 20 amos, that's how we define a Pesach. So therefore the Mavui can't be more than 20 amos because Pshat in Pesach is that which was true about the Heichal. And then in contrast, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, he held no. Heichal v'ulam kedusha achasi. No, they have the same exact sanctity, no distinctions to be made in regards to their kedusha. V'chiksiv Pesach ohel moed. When we see the word Pesach by the ohel moed, atarvaihu hu dichsiv. He says it's on both the Heichal and the ulam. Namely, some Pesach, some psachim have the height of 20, some have 40. So if you're 40, then you can't say a mavui is not kosher at 20 because the ulam is still considered a Pesach. So when you take this machlokes in our mission between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda down to the very granular level, it's amazing. All they're trying to figure out is what does the word Pesach mean? Very simple. We're just trying to figure it out. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that the word Pesach applied more broadly to both the Heichal and Ulam. The greater of them was 40 amos, so then 20 doesn't bother him. The Tanakama said a Pesach was very limited in scope because it was limited to the one of a greater Kedusha, which was the Heichal. So that's how they understand each other so far. The Ibaisema, some say that Rabbi Yehuda nami Kedushas Ulam l'churu Kedushas Heichal l'churu. No, really, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that it's not an issue of Kedusha, that he thinks that they have different levels of Kedusha, just like the Tanakama did. The reason why Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that he was willing to tolerate that was because Tichsiv, as the Pasuk writes, El Pesach Ulam Habayis, the opening of the Ulam. Says Tosfos, right above us, Dibra Hamaschil Tichsiv El Pesach Ulam Habayis, because we all know Tanakh by heart. Well, Tosfos did, and he says, Zeha Pasuk Enu B'Shum Makom. Sorry, you misquoted from your Tanakh days. That's not a Pasuk in Tanakh at all. Tosfos continues. We have a pasuk that speaks about that. In another pasuk, it says Ksiv Pesach Habayis, the opening of a house. It's as if it says explicitly in one pasuk Pesach Ulam Habayis. The rabbis are teaching us Pesach Ulam Ulam Habayis. Basically, this is a play on words of some kind. Now, it's a little difficult to bring a raya like that because we're trying to find out whether or not Pesach applies to Ulam. You can't create your own pasuk by putting two different pasukim together to come up with an answer that works for you. Very, very difficult Tosfos and difficult Gemara, requires its own time, its own analysis. Ayin Sham, if you have some extra time, an interesting dig into the research to figure out what it is that is needed to be learned. Sorry about that. Okay, says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan, what would the rabbis do with this quote-unquote pasuk? Ihav a kasav el Pesach ulam kidika amris. Well, you're right. Had it said Pesach ulam, then yes, then it would have been like you said. But hashta dichsiv el Pesach ulam habayis, if it says ulam habayis, habayis ha Pesach ulam. It's the house that's open into the ulam, which is the heichal. And therefore I hold that my number is correct. Okay, sorry. Some nephews are calling my children who I have not with. Okay, says the Gemara. Avha kiksiv. Hi, b'mishkan ksiv. Hold on one second. We were talking about the Mikdash. These psukim are by the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, there was no heichal and there was no ulam. So how did you learn anything of this from anything? Right? We're talking about the Mishkan, but you're trying to make references in a different way. It doesn't work. So it says the Gemara as follows. Ashkechan, we have that Mishkan de'ikri Mikdash, u'Mikdash de'ikri Mishkan. We have the scenarios where both a Mishkan and Mikdash are used interchangeably. De'ilote mahachi, if you don't say that Mishkan and Mikdash are interchangeable, then Hadamar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel Shlamim Sheshachtan Kodem Psichas Lasos HaHeichal, then when a korban is brought before the doors of the Heichal are brought, psulin, they're not kosher, that's a din. Shene'emar ushchato Pesach ohel moed. And what do we learn from that pasuk? Bizman shepsuchen, below bizman shehein ne'ulin. When do we say that it's true that the korban is kosher? Only when the doors are open. But there is no doors in the Mishkan. So it must be, therefore, that the words are interchangeable between Mishkan and Mikdash. Ay v'haki ksiv, hahi b'mishkan ksiv. Ela ashkechan, what does that show you? Then Mikdash to ikri Mishkan, Mishkan to ikri Mikdash. And says the Gemara as follows. Let's analyze this a little further. Bishlama Mikdash to ikri Mishkan. I could understand a case where the Mikdash is also called Mishkan dichsiv. V'nasati mishkani b'sochechem. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense that it applies to the mikdash as well. Ela mishkan de ikri mikdash minalan. Where is the scenario where we see a mishkan that's called a mikdash? Ilema, if you want to say that it's from the following, midichsiv, a pasuk that has multiple languages in them, both mishkan and mikdash. It says v'nasu akiasim nosei hamikdash vehikimu es hamishkan adbo. On that pasuk seems to have both mikdash and mishkan in the same pasuk. So maybe we see there that mishkan is in fact Ikri Mikdash. Turning to the top of Daf Beis, Amud Beis, says the Gemara, nope. Hahu be'aron ksiv. That pasuk was talking about carrying the aron. Rashi, top Rashi, Dibur Hamaschil, Hahu be'aron ksiv. Rashi says, Shehu Masa b'nei Kahas, that's what they did. And why was the word Mikdash used in that pasuk? Not because it was the Beis HaMikdash, but Ve'al Shem Shehu Mekudash. Mishar Hamasos Kari Mikdash. No, because it had a greater level of sanctity, and therefore from that pasuk you cannot glean that Mishkan is also called Mikdash, and therefore the Gemara tries option number 2. That doesn't work. So says the Gemara, Elamehacha, it must be Ve'asuli Mikdash Ve'shachanti B'socham. There we have a much more of a clear reference where we're supposed to make a Mishkan, and it says Ve'asuli Mikdash, and that Hashem will dwell in it, and that is how the Gemara answers this question. Moving on, this Gemara here that we're about to change to actually is a big machlokas rishonim. I'll just read the first line and then share with you a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes here. It says the Gemara, second line, Daf Beis Mid Beis. Vein l'Rabbanan uvein l'Rabbi Huda, according to both sheets as in our Mishnah, leilfu mi Pesach Shar HaChatzer. We should have learned everything out from Shar HaChatzer, the psukim that speak about the actual layout of the Mishkan. Now Rashi here highlights that what we are about to see is a discussion about the width of the opening of a wall, whether or not that is a discussion, yes or no, we'll have to see. And others are of the opinion that it's not about the width, but about the height, and we'll see some hints to both of those in the Gemara. So it says the Gemara as follows. According to both of them, we should have learned from the Pesach, from the opening of Shar HaChatzer. What was the Shar HaChatzer? D'chsiv, the pasuk writes, Orach HaChatzer, what were the basic measurements of the Mikdash? Mea be'ama, 100 amos in one direction, Berochav chamishim bechamishim, and it's 50 wide, so it's 100 by 50, 5,000 square amos. B'koma chamesh amos, and it's 5 amos tall. Uchsiv, the pasuk also says, B'chamesh esrei amma kilaim lakasef. Uchsiv ulakasef hashenis mizeh umizeh l'shar hachatzer kilaim chamesh esrei amma. Now, these two psukim indicate as follows. If this were the shape of the Beis HaMikdash, you have 100 on the long side, and you have 50 on the narrower side, it's the approximate shape of the rectangle. On one of the shorter ends, there was 15 amos on each side that was blocked off. So 15 plus 15 is 30. The whole width is 50. So 50 minus 2 15s, 50 minus 30 is 20. That's how big the hole is left in the middle, right in the opening. There's 20 amos open right here. That's what the Gemara says. And then continues the Gemara with its argument, Malahalan, changing girsa according to some, Malahalan esrim, Afkan esrim. If you want to read it with, Malahalan chamesh barochav esrim, 5 tall, 20 wide. Afkan chamesh barochav esrim. It should be 20 wide as well. So says the Gemara, that has a different name to it. That's Pesach Sha'ar Hechatzer Ikri. Pesach Stam Alo Ikri. No, you can't learn from there. That has a specific name to it. That Pesach is called the Sha'ar Hechatzer. It's not Stam a Pesach. Namely, in our mission, according to Rashi's view of this Gemara, if we're talking about the width, it's really asking on the sheets of the Tanna Kama. Why is it that you say that 10 amos is the maximum width? According to this Gemara, it should be 20 amos that's the maximum width, because as mentioned, that's exactly what happened in the Mishkan. 15 to the right, 15 to the left, 20 in the middle, wide open. There's no Tzuras HaPesach, it should work. It says the Gemara, that Psicha is called the Pesach of the Sha'ar HaChatzer. It's not Stam, the name of a Pesach, and therefore you cannot learn from there. Says the Gemara, V'i ba'isema, some say, Miksiv, does the pasuk say, doesn't it say, Kilaim chamesh esrei ama el hakasef? That's what the pasuk reads. El hakasef. B'gova hu d'chsiv, isn't that talking about the height? Says the Gemara, Gova, talking about the height? B'ksiv, v'koma chamesh amos. The pasuk just said that the height was only 5 amos. How could you say that this is talking about the height? It's not talking about the height. Answers the Gemara, well, maybe it is. Hahu, that reference of the 5 amos is misfas mizbeach ulamala, is from the top of the mizbeach. That's when we measure 5. So there is another pshat in this Gemara that this is not referencing our Mishnah of the width of 10 versus 20, but rather is talking about the height, that the wall was actually 15 tall. The wall, it says it was only 5. It was 5 on top of what would have been the height of the tent of the Mizbeach, so that no one could see from outside the Mishkan in. So from the top of the Mizbeach, they added another 5, and that's the reference in the pasuk of the 5. Oh, so says the Gemara, wait a minute. You tried to tell me that the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, that was of the opinion that it has a higher height. We said that we learned that from the Ulam, which has a height of 40. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. Rabbi Yehuda mi pischo shel Ulam gamar. You said he learned that the height of the Mavui is allowed to be more than 20 because he bases it on the Ulam, which has a height of 40. The Mishnah writes, what do we see? We see in our Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda was not Palig. Now, what were the measurements of the Ulam's doorway? 40 height, 20 wide. But our Mishnah says, the Rabbi Yehuda said, well, our Mishnah is silent about Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to the width. In our Mishnah, we said in the name of the Tanakama that if there's a break of 10 amos, you have to be Mamayit. Silence from Rabbi Yehuda. What does that imply? No problem at all. Why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda say that there's a 20 amma maximum? Because after all, that's what the Ulam was the measure, right? You said if you're learning that Rabbi Yehuda's measured as the Ulam, 40 tall, 20 wide, he should at least say in the Mishnah, Ad Esrim Amma. He says nothing. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, don't worry. Halig Bibraisa, Ditanya, V'haracha Miyud Amos Yema'e. There's a Braisa, separate of our Mishnah. The Braisa, as you all know, were not collected in a book. They were only written and collected sporadically throughout Shas as we have them. They are not in a book anywhere. They never were. So we have a separate Braisa of our Mishnah that says that the Tanakama holds if it's a 10 amma break right to left, lateral, then you have to make it less in order to make the mavui kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein sarach lamai. He does argue against the Tanakama. We see an argument there. It says Gemara, v'liflog b'masnisin. If he's arguing in one place, write it in our Mishnah. Tell us that he's arguing in our Mishnah. Why only in the Brisa? It's not a secret. It says the Gemara, v'liflog b'masnisin. Says the Gemara, palig b'gofa v'hu adin l'rach. That's what he meant. That's what he meant. Of course, that's what he means. Obviously. And therefore, it's obvious if he's learning from Ulam, 40 tall, so then good, and 20 wide, good. It's obvious that that's what the argument is. Our Mishnah left it out. The Brisa wrote it, but there's no difference between our Mishnah and this Brisa. Everyone agrees that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on the Tanakama. Akati, Rabbi Yehuda mi pischo shelulam gama. We're asking again. I still don't understand how this is possible. Vehatanya, we have a Brisa that says Mavui shugavoa mikaf ama yema'et. This we know, the Tanakama Shita, another Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda machshir ad mem v'nun ama. Different Shita. We haven't seen this one yet. Rabbi Yehuda allows it up to 40 or up to 50. V'tani bar kapara, separately in the Tosefta bar kapara wrote ad meya. These are the Shitas now. Tanakama says 20. Rabbi Yehuda says 40 or 50. And bar kapara says up to 100. Says the Gemara as follows. Bishlam ala bar kapara guzma. I got it. You want to tell me 100 amos tall? I know you're just being extreme. No one can see that tall. You're going to see a little fish wire 150 feet off the ground. No one's going to see that. Everybody knows that bar kapara is just an exaggeration. Elul Rabbi Yehuda, my guzma. You're giving me an exact shear. Bishlam ala Rabbi Yehuda arbaim. I can even accept your 40 because you're learning from the ulam. Gamar mi pischo shelulam ela nun minale. What is the 50? Is that your approximation? That's your guzma? That's a terrible guzma when your previous number is from the ulam. That's a real number. So 50? You can't break 40. You're making up numbers now? So now the Gemara says the last 30 lines were undoing because Rav Chizah presents a totally different way. And he says that Rav misunderstood. All of this Gemara was presented in the name of Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. And then now here's what the Gemara says. About 2/3 of the way down, Daf Beis, Amud Beis. Amar Rav Chizah, Rav made an error in understanding our Mishnah. Why? The Tanya, because the Brisa writes, if there is a mavui that the korah is going to be less than, the lechi korah is going to be less than 20 amos or more, from the opening of what would have been the heichal, very explicit language, that it's referencing the heichal, shitas tanakama, yema'et. Husavar, Rav looked at that and he said as follows: Midrabanan, it must be that they held mipischo shel heichal gamre. They must have learned from the pischo shel heichal. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda mipischo shel ulam gamre. That's what he thought. Velohi, he was wrong. Rav was not correct. We're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole to say that Rabbi Yehuda must be that at the 40 and the 50, it must be that he learned from the Ulam. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. Rabbi Yehuda, mi pischa de malachim gamar. Incorrect. He learned from the doorways and openings of kings. Sometimes they were 40 and sometimes they were 50. He wasn't learning from the Heichal, from the Ulam at all. Nothing. Rav made an error. So Rav Chizda totally changes gears here and says, yes, it's correct that the Tanna Kama did learn his share of 20 amos from, where did he learn it from? He learned it from the Heichal. But no, it is not correct that the Rabbanan learned it from the Ulam. They did not. They learned it from Pischan Shel Malachim. Says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan imi Pischan Shel Heichal Gimirei. If the rabbis, the Chachamim, learned out from the Heichal, which we know that they did now according to everyone, both according to Rav and according to Rav Chizda, they learned it out from the Heichal. This is Tanna Kama 20 amos. Well, I don't understand. The Heichal had something other than the 20 amos. It also had doors. Liba'u delasos keheichal. Maybe we should have said that to make an Eruv kosher at a Mavui's entrance, you need doors just like the Heichal. Why not? If you're looking at the 20 amos height and you're saying that we need that, that's the definition of a Pesach. That's the Tanna Kama. The definition of a Pesach is the Heichal, 20 amos. Well, it also had doors. So why do we require doors at the Mavui? Says the Gemara, a very important idea. Let's finish the question first, actually, before I tell you the answer. That would be skipping words here. Alama Tanan, why then does the Mishnah write that Hechsher Mavui, how do we make a Mavui kosher? Beis Shammai Omrim Lechi V'Kor, Beis Hillel Omrim Lechi O Kore, either the Lechi or Kore, but no doors. Why aren't they talking about doors? It's built into the Beis HaMikdash, and the Tanna Kama learns from the Heichal, there are doors there. Answers the Gemara, finishing off for tonight. Delasos Heichal Litznius Be'almahu De Avidan. The doors of the Heichal were not halachically required in that they defined the Pesach. They were required in that they were for tznius purposes, and therefore we don't need to extract from the Heichal that the only way a mavui is kosher is by having less than 20 amos and the door. The 20 amos is ma'akev. If it's above that, the Tanna Kama will say, sorry, you ma'et. But when it comes to doors, that's not required because they are only required for tznius. We will continue tomorrow from here with Daf Gimel, picking up tomorrow at 8:40 p.m. with a 9:30 Marav to follow. Wishing you all a beautiful night.